By the time Grace reached her apartment on the west side of Cleveland, the rain had slowed to a tired drizzle, the kind that made everything look older than it was. Her building stood between a closed laundromat and a corner store with bars over the windows, for floors of faded brick, buzzing hallway lights, and neighbors who knew how to mind their own business because survival did not leave much room for curiosity. Grace climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator because the elevator had been out for 3 weeks, and every step sent a dull ache up her calves. On the second landing, Mrs. Alvarez had left a grocery bag beside her door with a sticky note that read, "Take the apples before they go soft." Grace smiled despite herself, took 2, and whispered, "Thank you," even though no one was there to hear it. Her apartment was small enough that she could see almost all of it from the doorway. A second-hand couch with one sunken cushion, a tiny kitchen table covered with unopened envelopes, a thrift store lamp that flickered when the refrigerator kicked on, and a framed photo of her mother on the windowsill. In the picture, Linda Miller was laughing in front of Lake Erie, her white hair blowing across her face, one hand holding down a blue scarf, the other wrapped around Grace's shoulders. That was before the hospital rooms, before the insurance denials, before Grace learned that grief did not arrive alone. It brought bills. It brought final notices. It brought phone calls from polite strangers who said things like outstanding balance, as if they were discussing the weather. Grace dropped her canvas bag on the chair and emptied her pocket onto the table. $14.75. She stared at the small pile of crumpled bills and coins, then laughed once under her breath, because if she did not laugh, she might sit down and never get back up. The rent envelope waited near the salt shaker. The red stamp across the front said past due. The landlord, Mr. Keller, had slid it under her door that morning with a note written in block letters. Friday, no exceptions. Grace took off her cardigan and hung it over the back of a chair. It was still damp from the alley. Her stomach tightened when she remembered the dinner roll she had given away with the soup, but she pushed the thought aside and bit into one of Mrs. Alvarez's apples instead. It was bruised on one side and sweet on the other. That felt about right. She stood in the kitchen, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on her mother's picture. "I know," she murmured. "You would have fed him too." The apartment answered with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of sirens several blocks away. Once, Grace had been 3 semesters away from finishing her degree in social work. She had wanted a job where helping people was not something she squeezed in between coffee refills and cleaning tables, but something printed on her name badge. She used to carry textbooks in her backpack and underline sentences about community care, housing insecurity, trauma recovery, and dignity. Then her mother got sick. At first, Grace tried to keep everything. Classes in the morning, diner shifts at night, hospital visits before sunrise. She told herself strong daughters figured things out. But strength did not make medication cheaper. Strength did not stop the rent from rising. Strength did not keep her mother from apologizing every time Grace opened another bill. So Grace left school, picked up more shifts, and learned the ugly math of adulthood. If she paid the electric bill, she delayed the hospital payment. If she bought groceries, she risked the phone being shut off. If she slept, she lost hours that could become money. Her mother had passed 6 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon while rain tapped gently against the hospital window, softer than the rain tonight. Almost kind. Since then, Grace had lived in the space between almost and not enough. Almost enough tips. Almost enough sleep. Almost enough faith to believe life would not always feel like a locked door. She finished the apple, set the core on a napkin, and opened the top envelope on the table. Another collection notice. Another number too large to feel real. She folded it back exactly as it had come, because sometimes order was the only power she had left. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her work shoes too. Stuffed them with newspaper so they would dry before morning. A corner of paper slipped from the side pocket, and for a second she thought it was another bill. Instead, it was a flyer from Nora Bell's community kitchen. Hot meals, job resources, winter coat donations, no questions asked. Grace had picked up a stack the week before and promised Nora she would hand them out when she could. She ran her thumb over the words "no questions asked." That was why she loved Nora. The woman had built a whole place around the belief that shame should never be the price of help. Grace wished the world worked that way. She wished Miller's Diner worked that way. She wished her manager, Brad, had not spent the evening watching her with narrowed eyes because she had given a coffee refill to an elderly man who counted nickels with shaking fingers. "Grace, this is not a charity," he had snapped near the register. She had wanted to say, "No, it is worse. A charity has a purpose." But she needed the job, so she swallowed the words and smiled until her jaw hurt. That was what people misunderstood about kindness. They thought it was soft. Grace knew better. Kindness was not softness. Kindness was choosing not to become cruel after the world gave you every reason to. She showered in lukewarm water because the building never seemed to have enough heat after midnight, then changed into an old, oversized sweatshirt from the community college she never finished. The letters across the front were cracked from too many washes. She sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed lotion into her sore hands, pausing at the small scar near her thumb from a broken coffee mug last winter. Her phone buzzed with a message from Nora. "You still coming tomorrow evening? We are short 2 volunteers." Grace looked at the rent notice on the table. She looked at her work schedule taped to the refrigerator. Double shift at the diner. 4 hours at the community kitchen after. Her body already protested, but her fingers typed before doubt could make a case. "Yes, I will be there." She set the phone down and turned off the lamp. Darkness settled over the apartment, but sleep did not come right away. Instead, she saw the man from the alley again. Eli. The way he had held the soup like it weighed more than food. The way he had asked why she would help a stranger, not with suspicion exactly, but with disbelief, as if kindness had become a language he no longer trusted. Grace turned onto her side and pulled the blanket to her chin. She told herself he was probably already at St. Mark's. Maybe Nora would see him in the morning. Maybe he would get a clean pair of socks, a hot breakfast, and a lead on temporary work. Maybe that would be the end of it. But deep inside, in the small quiet place where instinct lived, Grace felt the story had not ended in that alley. It had only opened a door. And somewhere across the city, in the back seat of a black company car parked 2 blocks away from the shelter he never entered, Ethan Whitmore sat alone with the diner napkin in his hand, reading her words again under the dim glow of his phone, while his driver waited silently at the curb and the empire bearing his family name continued lying to the people it claimed to serve. The next morning arrived without mercy. Gray light slipped through the thin curtains of Grace's apartment long before her alarm finished ringing. And for one breathless second, she forgot the rent notice, the sore feet, the man in the alley, the collection letters stacked like accusations on her kitchen table. Then her phone buzzed again, and real life came back all at once. She dressed in the same black pants she had hung over a chair to dry, tied her hair into a loose knot, and ate the second apple from Mrs. Alvarez while standing over the sink. By 7:15, she was walking toward the bus stop with her diner uniform under her coat and $14.75 still folded in her pocket, untouched, because even hunger had to wait its turn. Miller's Diner looked cleaner from the street than it ever felt on the inside. The red neon sign blinked against the wet morning. Coffee steamed behind the front windows, and customers already filled the counter stools, hunched over eggs, toast, and the first complaints of the day. Grace stepped through the back door, punched in 2 minutes early, and heard Brad's voice before. She even had her apron tied. "We are short in dish today," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "And if you give away one more item that is not paid for, it comes out of your check." Grace kept her face still. "Good morning to you too." Brad finally looked at her, his expression flat. "I am serious, Grace." "So am I." She moved past him before her mouth could cost her the job. The morning rush hit hard. Coffee cups emptied faster than she could refill them. A toddler spilled orange juice under table 6. A man in a navy coat complained that his toast was too brown, then too pale, then cold. Grace smiled through all of it, because smiling was part of the uniform even when it felt like another unpaid task. By 10:30, the kitchen was backed up, the dishwasher had called out again, and plates were stacked so high near the sink that one wrong elbow could send half the breakfast rush crashing to the floor. That was when the back door opened. Grace turned with a tray balanced against her hip and saw him standing just inside the service entrance. Eli. His coat was dry now, but still worn, his hair combed back with water, his face cleaner than it had been in the alley. He held himself carefully, as if trying to look smaller than he was. For one strange second, Grace wondered if she had imagined him richer than his clothes allowed. Then he gave her a quiet nod. "You said if I needed help, I should ask for Nora. I did, Grace said, lowering the tray. Did you find her? Not yet. His eyes moved toward the mountain of dirty plates. But I saw the sign out front. Help wanted. Dishwasher. Brad appeared behind her, suspicion already sharpened in his eyes. We are not hiring walk-ins. Grace glanced at the sink, then back at him. We have 6 bus tubs full of plates and no dishwasher. That does not mean I am taking some random guy off the street. Eli did not flinch. He just stepped forward and spoke evenly. I can work today for cash at the end of the shift. If I slow you down, you do not pay me. Brad studied him, then looked at Grace as if this inconvenience were somehow her fault. You know him? Grace hesitated. The honest answer was no. The human answer was enough. He is polite. That is more than I can say for half the people who sit in booth 4. One of the line cooks laughed under his breath. Brad shot him a look, then pointed toward the sink. Fine. 1 shift. You break anything, you pay for it. Eli nodded. Understood. 10 minutes later, he was wearing a stained apron and standing in front of the industrial sink like a man studying machinery from another planet. Grace caught him holding the spray nozzle backward and hurried over before he soaked himself. First day on Earth, she whispered. He looked down at the nozzle, then at her, and a faint, embarrassed smile crossed his face. Something like that. She took it from him and showed him the rhythm. Scrape, rinse, rack, slide. Hot water is on the left. Soap is here. Do not touch the silver lever unless you want steam in your face. Scrape, rinse, rack, slide, he repeated. Good. You learn fast. I have had good teachers. The words were simple, but he said them like they mattered. Grace looked away first. For the next few hours, Eli worked without complaint. He was not graceful. He splashed water on his sleeves, dropped a spoon into the garbage disposal, and once stacked bowls so badly that Grace had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. But he listened. He watched. And more than that, he noticed. He noticed when Brad pulled cash tips from the jar near the register and slipped 2 bills beneath the clipboard. He noticed when a delivery labeled Whitmore Foundation donation was carried through the back door, only for half the boxes to be set aside near Brad's office instead of going toward the community kitchen pickup. He noticed when a woman in a shelter uniform asked quietly whether the leftover bread order was ready, and Brad told her there had been a shortage while 6 untouched bags sat behind him. Eli's hands slowed in the dishwater, but his face gave nothing away. Grace saw the pause. You okay? She asked. Yes, he said too quickly. Just thinking. Careful. Thinking is how people get sad around here. He looked at her then, and for a second the noise of the kitchen thinned around them. Does this happen often? Does what happen? People asking for food and being told there is none. Grace's expression changed, not into surprise, but into the tired caution of someone who had learned which truths were safe to say out loud. Depends who is asking and whether there is a camera nearby. Eli turned back to the sink, jaw tightening just slightly. Grace noticed that too. Near the end of the shift, she found him standing by the back door during his break, rubbing his hands together against the cold. The old coat he wore was still damp at the cuffs, and Cleveland wind had a way of finding every weakness in fabric. Grace disappeared into the small staff closet and pulled a faded denim jacket from the top shelf. It had belonged to her father, though she rarely said that out loud. He had left when she was young, but the jacket had stayed, carrying the smell of cedar, motor oil, and a memory she had never fully trusted. She held it out to Eli. Here, until you get something warmer. He stared at the jacket like she had offered him the keys to a house. Grace, I cannot take that. You are not taking it. You are borrowing it. It looks important. It is a jacket. That is not what I said. She softened, just a little. Then bring it back. He took it carefully and slipped it on. It was a bit tight across his shoulders, but warmer than what he had. As he pushed his hand into the pocket, his fingers brushed a folded scrap of paper. He started to pull it out. Grace reached for it too late. Oh, that is nothing. But he had already opened it. The handwriting was faded, written in block letters on an old receipt. A man's worth is what he does when nobody claps. Eli read the sentence once. Then again. Something passed behind his eyes, fast and private. Grace shifted uncomfortably. My dad wrote that years ago. I do not even know why I kept it. Eli folded the paper with unusual care and placed it back in the pocket. Maybe because it is true. The back door swung open before Grace could answer, and Brad stepped out with his clipboard under one arm. Break is over. Both of you. Grace moved. First. Eli stayed a half-second longer, looking toward the donation boxes stacked by Brad's office, then down at the denim jacket around him. By the time he returned to the sink, his clumsy act had become something quieter, sharper. He was still Eli to everyone in that diner. A broke man with wet shoes and borrowed sleeves. But beneath the soap, steam, and noise, Ethan Whitmore had just found the first crack in the polished lie his company had been selling to the world. By the third day, Grace had stopped being surprised when Eli showed up before sunrise. He always came through the back door at 6:45, wearing her father's denim jacket over the same plain shirt, carrying a gas station coffee he never seemed to drink. He would nod to the line cooks, wash his hands, tie on the stained apron, and move straight to the sink as if the rhythm of scrape, rinse, rack, slide had become a quiet promise he intended to keep. He was still awkward with the dish machine, still too careful with chipped plates no one else valued, still the only man Grace had ever seen apologize to a mop bucket after tripping over it. But he worked hard. He listened more than he spoke. And somehow, without trying to, he began making the diner feel less heavy. On Thursday morning, the espresso machine started coughing steam like an old radiator, and Brad slapped the side of it twice before declaring, "Great. That is $1,200 we do not have." Grace stood beside the counter with a pot of coffee in one hand, watching customers turn their heads as the machine hissed again. "Maybe do not hit it," she said. Brad glared. "You want to fix it?" Before Grace could answer, Eli stepped out from the dish area, wiping his hands on a towel. "May I look?" Brad laughed sharply. "You fix espresso machines now." Eli gave a small shrug. "I have worked around equipment." It was such a strange sentence that Grace looked at him twice. "Not I fixed one once. Not my uncle had a coffee shop." Worked around equipment, like a man describing a factory floor from a glass office above it. Brad waved him forward with an annoyed sigh. "Fine. Make yourself useful." Eli crouched behind the counter, checked the water line, listened to the pressure valve, then asked for a screwdriver. Grace handed him one from the junk drawer. Their fingers brushed, and he looked up at her for half a second, close enough that she noticed the tiny flecks of gold in his brown eyes. She stepped back too quickly and pretended to refill napkins. 10 minutes later, the machine gave one clean sigh and began working again. The cook hooped. A customer at the counter clapped once. Brad frowned as if the repair had personally offended him. "Beginner's luck," he muttered. Eli stood, wiping a streak of dust from his sleeve. "Probably." Grace leaned closer as she passed him with a tray. "First day on Earth. But you speak fluent espresso machine?" "I contain multitudes," he said, dead serious. She laughed before she could stop herself, and the sound surprised them both. It had been a long time since her laugh came out that easily. After that, small moments began to collect between them, not loud enough for anyone else to notice, but steady enough for Grace to feel them. Eli learned that she liked her coffee with 1 cream and no sugar, though she almost never had time to drink it warm. Grace learned that he hated wasting bread, always setting aside untouched rolls in a clean bag before Brad could throw them away. He learned that she hummed old Motown songs when counting tips. She learned that he could read a legal notice faster than anyone she had ever met. One afternoon, she found him standing near the staff lockers with her rent warning in his hand, his brow tight. She snatched it back, heat rushing to her face. "That is private." "I am sorry," he said immediately. "It fell from your bag. Then you put it back." "You are right." His voice was calm, but his eyes were not. "Grace, this fee they added is not legal under Ohio landlord rules unless it is in the lease." She stared at him. "How would you know that?" A pause. "Too long. I had a friend go through something similar." She narrowed her eyes. "You have a lot of very useful friends. I have had a lot of strange jobs." That is not the same answer. For the first time, he looked cornered. Not scared, exactly, but careful. "No," he said softly. "It is not." Grace waited, but he did not explain. The old instinct in her told her to step back. Men with missing details could become trouble. But then Mrs. Alvarez came into the diner with a cracked grocery cart and not enough cash for soup, and Grace saw Eli quietly pay for the difference while pretending to drop coins he had found under the counter. He did not look around to see who noticed. He did not smile when Mrs. Alvarez thanked Brad by mistake. He simply returned to the sink and kept washing dishes. A man's worth is what he does when nobody claps. The sentence in the jacket pocket came back to Grace, and against her better judgment, so did trust. That evening, after their shifts, Grace walked 6 blocks to Nora Bell's community kitchen, and Eli walked beside her carrying 2 bags of rolls that Miller's Diner officially had no use for. The air smelled like wet pavement and bus exhaust, and the sky had turned the color of steel. "You do not have to come," Grace said. "I know. Nora will put you to work." "Good. She may also ask nosy questions." "I will survive." Grace glanced at him. "You always talk like that." "Like what?" "Like every sentence has been approved by a lawyer." Eli almost smiled. "Occupational hazard. From washing dishes? From strange jobs." She shook her head, but she was smiling now. At the community kitchen, Nora Bell stood near the serving line with silver curls pinned beneath a red scarf, greeting every person by name as if they were walking into her own home. She hugged Grace with one arm, took the bread with the other, then looked Eli up and down in a way that made even him stand straighter. "And who is this?" Grace answered before he could. "This is Eli. He needed work. Now he is helping." Nora's eyes softened, but her voice stayed sharp. "Helping is good. Hiding is not. Remember that." Eli went still for just a second. Grace noticed. Nora noticed too, but she said nothing more. For the next 3 hours, they served soup, restocked cups, wiped tables, and carried boxes from the pantry. Eli worked quietly, but something changed in him there. He watched the room with an ache he could not fully conceal. Elderly veterans eating alone, mothers stretching one meal across a long evening, workers in uniforms coming in after shifts that still did not pay enough. Grace saw his face as he looked at them, and for the first time she wondered whether his sadness had less to do with having nothing and more to do with knowing too much. Near closing, a young volunteer dropped a box of canned vegetables, and the cans rolled across the floor. Grace knelt to gather them, and Eli knelt too. For a moment, their hands moved through the same small chaos, collecting what had scattered. "You are good at this," he said, picking up cans, making people feel like they still matter. Grace swallowed, caught off guard by the gentleness in his voice. "People do matter. Not everyone acts like it. Then they should learn." He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, warm and dangerous. Grace stood first, holding the cans against her chest like armor. "Come on," she said. "Before Nora decides we are both staying all night." Outside, the cold had sharpened. Eli took off the denim jacket and draped it over Grace's shoulders before she could protest. "You are shivering," he said. "So are you." "I have been colder." She wanted to ask when. She wanted to ask who he really was, where he slept, why he could fix machines and read leases and look at a soup kitchen like a man seeing the scene of a crime. Instead, she pulled the jacket closer, and the old note in the pocket brushed against her hand. Under the streetlight, with Nora locking the doors behind them and Cleveland moving tiredly around them, Grace let herself believe, just for that night, that maybe Eli was not a problem to solve or a mystery to fear. Maybe he was simply someone life had bruised differently than it had bruised her. But across the street, parked in the shadow of a closed pharmacy, a black sedan idled with its headlights off, and inside it, Ethan Whitmore's private investigator watched the community kitchen door, waiting to report which lies had finally begun to crack. The black sedan did not follow Grace home that night. It followed Ethan. 2 blocks after leaving the community kitchen, he stopped, under the green glow of a pharmacy sign, and waited until Grace's bus pulled away before crossing the street to the parked car. The rear door opened from inside. A man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a weathered briefcase looked up from a tablet. "You are taking risks," Daniel Price said. Ethan slid into the back seat, still wearing Grace's father's denim jacket over his work shirt. The driver pulled away from the curb without a word. For a few seconds, Ethan watched the wet city pass through the tinted window, shuttered storefronts, bus shelters, a woman carrying laundry in a plastic basket, a man asleep beneath the bright sign of a bank that would never know his name. "Tell me what you found," Ethan said. Daniel tapped the tablet. 3 more donation shipments marked as delivered to Nora Bell's kitchen. She never received them. 2 payroll entries for workers who do not exist. Vendor invoices inflated by almost 40%. All routed through shell accounts connected to Victor Hales. Ethan closed his eyes. Victor, the man his board called efficient, the man donors called visionary, the man who stood beside him at ribbon cuttings, smiled for cameras, and spoke about dignity while quietly draining the very programs built to protect it. "And Miller's Diner?" Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated. "It is one of the smaller outlets, but yes, it is part of the network. Food intended for community distribution is being diverted. Some is sold through back channels. Some is used for stage charity events. The paperwork is clean because the reports are being rewritten before they reach your office." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "My office." Daniel studied him over the top of his glasses. "That is not an accusation." "It should be." The words came out colder than he meant them to. He reached into the denim jacket pocket and felt the folded receipt Grace had kept there, the one with her father's sentence. A man's worth is what he does when nobody claps. Beside it, in his own coat pocket, was the diner napkin she had written on the first night. "Eat first. Explain later." 2 scraps of paper. 2 truths he had not earned. The city lights smeared across the window, and suddenly Ethan was not in the car anymore. He was back in his mother's sunroom 8 months earlier, standing beside a tray of untouched tea while Margaret Whitmore sat wrapped in a cream cardigan, thinner than she had ever allowed the public to see. She had been the one who built the Whitmore Foundation from a tax line into something real. Food access, transitional housing, job programs, emergency grants. She had known the names of kitchen directors and night shift volunteers. She had shown up without photographers. Then she had started asking questions. Why were costs rising while meals served were dropping? Why did community partners whisper off the record and smile on camera? Why did Victor always have an answer before anyone finished asking? "Ethan," she had said that afternoon, her voice soft but steady. "If our name feeds cameras more than people, burn the system down." He had told her she was tired. He had promised to look into it after the Denver acquisition closed, after the quarterly report, after the board retreat, after one more important thing that had seemed urgent because money made it loud. She died 3 weeks later, before he ever gave her questions the respect they deserved. A month after the funeral, a plain envelope arrived at his private office with no return address. Inside were copies of invoices, photographs of empty pantry shelves, and a note made of 5 typed words. Your mother was not wrong. Since then, Ethan had tried audits, surprise visits, internal reviews. Every time, the numbers polished themselves before he arrived. Staff became cheerful. Shelves became full. Cameras appeared. People praised the foundation with eyes that asked him not to make things worse. That was when he stopped arriving as Ethan Whitmore. He bought worn clothes from a thrift store, left his watch in his pocket, and became Eli, a man no one needed to impress. And in 3 days, Grace Miller had shown him more truth than a year of reports. The sedan turned toward the lakefront, where the Whitmore headquarters rose above the city in glass and steel. Ethan looked up at the building as they passed, at the top floor lights still burning. For executives who would never wash a dish, never count coins for rent, never wonder whether leftover soup could save someone's night. Grace does not know, he said. Daniel's expression softened. About you. About any of it. She will. Ethan said nothing. That was the part he could not make clean. In the beginning, Grace had been a witness, someone kind enough to prove the system was cruel. Then she became the person who stood beside him in steam and noise, who laughed when he mishandled a mop, who saw through him just enough to make lying feel like swallowing glass. He had watched her give away bread she needed, defend people who could not defend her back, and walk home exhausted after serving meals for free. He had watched her treat dignity like a basic necessity. And each day he stayed silent. The truth grew teeth. If I tell her now, Ethan said, Victor will know. He already has people watching the kitchen. If he realizes I am inside the diner, he destroys the records, scares the staff, and disappears behind another set of lawyers. Then you need evidence before the gala. Daniel opened the briefcase and handed him a slim folder. There is a donor event Saturday night. Victor plans to announce the expansion of the exact program he is stealing from. Press will be there. Board members. City officials. If you expose him there, he cannot bury it quietly. Ethan opened the folder. On the first page was a photo of Victor Hales in a Navy suit, smiling beside a banner that read Feeding Cleveland Forward. Behind him, almost hidden at the edge of the frame, stood Nora Bell, her smile polite, her eyes tired. Ethan turned the page and found a list of names. Grace Miller's was highlighted in yellow. Why is she on this? He asked sharply. Daniel leaned forward. Victor's team flagged her as a problem. She has been asking where the missing donations go. She has been sending people to Nora. And now she is connected to you, even if she does not know who you are. Ethan stared at her name until the letters blurred. What are they planning? I do not know yet. The answer landed like a stone. Ethan pressed the folder closed, his hand tightening over the cardboard. Find out. I am trying. Try faster. Daniel did not argue. The sedan slowed near a private entrance beneath Whitmore Tower. Ethan did not move to get out. He looked down at the denim jacket, at the faded seams, at the pocket holding another man's old wisdom. Grace had trusted him with the only warm thing she had to give. Not because he deserved it. Because she believed people mattered before they proved their worth. That belief was now in danger because of him. She cannot be hurt for this, Ethan said. Daniel's voice was quiet. Then stop standing between two lives, Ethan. Choose which man is going to protect her. The car fell silent. Outside, rain began again, soft against the roof, almost gentle. Ethan stepped out into the underground entrance, but he did not go upstairs to the penthouse. He stood in the cold concrete glow, opened the diner napkin one more time, and read Grace's words until they stopped feeling like kindness and started feeling like judgment. Eat first. Explain later. Soon, he would have to explain everything. Friday morning at Miller's Diner began with the smell of burnt toast, wet coats, and trouble Grace could feel before she understood it. The sky outside was the color of dishwater, and the neon sign in the window flickered like it was too tired to pretend anymore. Grace had barely tied her apron when Brad called her into the back office, his voice sharp enough to cut through the kitchen noise. Eli was at the sink, hands buried in soapy water, but he looked up the second Brad said her name. Grace noticed. She also noticed the way Brad blocked the office doorway with one shoulder, as if he had already decided she was guilty of something. Sit down, Brad said. Grace stayed standing. The office was barely larger than a closet, packed with old invoices, cleaning supplies, a dusty printer, and the sour smell of coffee left too long on a burner. On the desk sat 3 cardboard boxes labeled Whitmore Foundation Donation. Grace recognized them immediately. They were supposed to have gone to Nora's community kitchen 2 days ago. What is this about? She asked. Brad folded his arms. You tell me. He slid a paper across the desk. It was a printed inventory sheet with her name written beside several missing items. Canned soup, bread, protein bars, hygiene kits. Grace stared at the list, heat rising slowly into her face. I did not take these. That is not what the paperwork says. Then the paperwork is wrong. Brad gave a humorless laugh. Convenient. Grace looked at the boxes again, then back at him. Those donations were never delivered. I asked you about them yesterday. And now half the shipment is missing. His voice rose just enough for the kitchen to hear. Maybe because you think being poor gives you permission to take whatever you want. The words hit harder because they were said calmly, with the practiced confidence of a man who knew exactly where to press. Grace felt her throat tighten, but she did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that some people mistook tears for confession. I help at a community kitchen, she said. I do not steal from one. Brad opened the office door wider. Several employees were watching now. Customers at the counter turned slightly, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Eli stepped away from the sink, drying his hands slowly on a towel. Grace saw him move, saw his jaw tighten, saw something dangerous and restrained pass over his face. For one breath, she thought he would speak. She wanted him to. She hated that she wanted him to. Brad pointed toward the lockers. Clean out your things. Grace blinked. You are firing me? Pending review. That means firing. It means you should have thought about consequences before making yourself the hero of every sad little story that walks through that door. The kitchen went quiet. Even the grill seemed to hush. Eli took one step forward. She did not do this. Brad turned on him. And you know that how? Eli stopped. The question hung there, ugly and perfect. Because he did know. He knew too much. He knew about the diverted boxes, the false inventory, the missing shipments, Victor's shell accounts, the gala, the investigation tightening around all of them. But to prove Grace innocent in that moment, he would have to reveal how he knew. He would have to become Ethan Whitmore in the middle of a diner full of people before Daniel had secured the last records. Before Victor could be trapped in public. Before the whole rotten system lost its chance to be exposed. Grace watched his silence form. She watched him choose it. Something inside her went still. Brad smirked. That is what I thought. Grace untied her apron with fingers that barely felt like hers. She walked to her locker, opened it, and removed the few things inside. Lip balm, a spare pair of socks, a bus pass, Nora's flyers, and the old canvas bag she had carried since community college. Eli followed her halfway, his face pale beneath the kitchen lights. "Grace," he said quietly. "Not now. Please." She turned then, and the hurt in her eyes made him look away. "You just stood there. I am trying to protect something bigger than this." The second the words left his mouth, he knew they were wrong. Grace stared at him as if he had become a stranger in front of her. "Bigger than my name? That is not what I meant." "Then say what you mean." He could not. Around them, people pretended to return to work. Brad disappeared into the office with the satisfaction of someone who had pushed a piece exactly where he wanted it. Grace reached for the denim jacket hanging from the peg near the back door. For a moment, Ethan thought she was taking it with her. Instead, she pulled it off the hook and held it out to him. "This is yours to return." He looked at it, then at her. "Grace, keep it. It is cold." "I said take it." Her voice did not shake, and that made it worse. He accepted the jacket like it weighed more than cloth. The folded paper in the pocket brushed against his hand. Her father's words. "A man's worth is what he does when nobody claps." Grace saw his fingers pause and gave a small, broken smile. "Funny sentence, is it not?" "Grace, I thought it meant doing the right thing when no one is watching." She swallowed. "Maybe it also means doing the right thing when everyone is watching and it costs you something." He had no answer that would not sound like another lie. She adjusted the strap of her bag and walked toward the back door. Rain streaked the small window. The alley waited behind it, gray and cold. The same alley where she had first handed him soup and believed his hunger was simple. He followed her outside because not following felt impossible. The wind lifted loose strands of her hair around her face. "I can fix this," he said. "When?" she asked. "Soon." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "People like us live in today, Eli. Rent is today. Hunger is today. Losing a job is today. Soon is a word people use when they can afford to wait." His name, the false one, cut through him. Eli, a man who did not exist. A man she had trusted because Ethan had built him from silence. "There are things you do not know," he said. Grace nodded slowly, rain gathering on her lashes. "I am starting to understand that." She stepped backward. "I guess I was wrong about you too." Then she turned and walked into the rain, shoulders straight, bag pressed against her side, refusing to look as wounded as she was. Ethan stood beneath the awning with the denim jacket in his hands while every instinct screamed at him to run after her, to tell her his name, his fortune, his guilt, his mother's warning, all of it. Instead, his phone buzzed. A message from Daniel lit the screen. "Victor, move the final records. Gala is tomorrow. We need you inside tonight." Ethan looked from the message to the empty street where Grace had disappeared. For the first time since the investigation began, the mission felt less like justice and more like betrayal wearing a noble coat. He folded the denim jacket over his arm and went back inside, but the diner no longer smelled like coffee or bleach or rain. It smelled like the exact moment a good woman stopped believing him. By Saturday evening, Grace had decided she was not going to the Whitmore Foundation Gala. She told herself this while sitting on the edge of her bed in the small apartment with the flickering lamp, still wearing the black pants from the diner because she had not found the energy to change. Rain tapped against the window again, softer now, as if the city had tired itself out. On the kitchen table sat her final paycheck from Miller's Diner, folded beside the rent notice and a paper bag from Nora Bell, containing a navy blue dress with the tags still on. Nora had arrived that afternoon, knocked 3 times, stepped inside without waiting for permission, and said, "You are coming tonight." Grace had stared at her. "I lost my job because of those people." Nora had placed the dress on the table. "Exactly why you need to stand in a room full of them and tell the truth. They will not believe me. Maybe not at first." Nora's eyes had softened. "But silence is the one thing people like Victor Hales count on. Do not give it to him for free." Now, hours later, Grace stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, the dress fitting better than she wanted it to, her hair pinned back with 2 drugstore clips, her only pair of black flats polished with a damp washcloth. She did not look rich. She did not look powerful. But she looked steady, and that would have to be enough. At 7:30, Nora's old Buick pulled up outside, and Grace climbed in with her coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. The drive downtown felt unreal. Cleveland's wet streets reflected the lights from office towers and hotel signs, gold and white and red sliding across the windshield. Nora did not fill the silence. She only reached over once and squeezed Grace's hand. The gala was held inside the ballroom of the Halewood Hotel, a place Grace had passed dozens of times from the bus but never entered. The lobby smelled like lilies, polished wood, and money. Crystal fixtures glowed above marble floors. Men in dark suits laughed beside women in elegant gowns. Servers moved through the room with trays of sparkling water and tiny food arranged like decoration. Grace stepped inside and immediately felt the old instinct to apologize for taking up space. Nora leaned close. "Do not shrink." Grace lifted her chin. "I am trying." At the registration table, a woman with a headset searched the guest list and frowned at Grace's name until Nora said, "She is with me." That was enough to turn the frown into a tight smile. Inside the ballroom, huge banners hung from the walls. Whitmore Foundation, feeding Cleveland forward, dignity through action. Grace looked at those words and thought of boxes hidden in Brad's office, stale bread denied to hungry people, and Eli standing silent while her name was dragged across a diner floor. Her chest tightened. She scanned the room before she could stop herself. No Eli. Of course not. Why would he be here? Nora guided her toward a table near the side, where community partners had been placed far from the stage, but close enough to look included in photographs. Grace sat with her hands folded in her lap. Across the room, Victor Hales moved from donor to donor in a navy suit, smiling with polished warmth. He had silver hair, a camera-ready face, and the calm confidence of a man who had never worried about being believed. When his eyes landed on Nora, he gave a small nod. When they landed on Grace, the smile did not change, but something colder flickered behind it. Grace felt it immediately. Nora whispered, "There he is." "He knows who I am," Grace said. "Good," Nora replied. "Then make sure he remembers." The lights dimmed. A woman in a black gown stepped to the podium and welcomed everyone. Applause rose around the ballroom, smooth and automatic. Grace listened as speakers praised generosity, partnership, vision, impact. Each word sounded clean from the stage, scrubbed of the people who had stood in line for soup, the workers who had lost tips, the volunteers who stretched one donated case of canned goods across 100 hungry hands. Then Victor took the podium. He spoke beautifully. That was the worst part. He spoke about compassion as if he had invented it. He spoke about the foundation's expansion as if missing food and false reports were just shadows that could be erased by brighter lights. "Tonight," Victor said, spreading his hands, "we celebrate leadership that does not merely give from above, but reaches down." Grace felt Nora stiffen beside her. "Reaches down." The words made Grace's stomach turn. People applauded. Cameras flashed. Victor smiled. "And now," he continued, "it is my honor to introduce the man whose family name made all of this possible. A visionary businessman, a private philanthropist, and the driving force behind Whitmore Group's next chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ethan Whitmore." The ballroom rose. Before Grace understood why, chairs shifted. Applause swelled. The spotlight moved toward the side entrance of the stage. And then Eli walked out. Not in the worn coat. Not in the borrowed denim jacket. Not with dishwater on his sleeves or rain in his hair. He wore a black tuxedo cut perfectly to his shoulders, his hair neatly styled, his face pale beneath the lights. He looked exactly like he belonged there, and that was what broke something in her. Grace stood halfway, then sat down again because her knees had gone weak. Nora whispered her name, but the sound came from far away. Ethan Whitmore stepped to the podium, and every rich person in the room applauded the man Grace had fed in an alley. The man she had defended to Brad. The man she had walked beside to the community kitchen. The man who had worn her father's jacket while hiding a last name engraved on buildings across the city. He looked out over the ballroom, and his eyes found her almost instantly. The applause continued, but his expression changed. Regret, sharp and visible, crossed his face. Grace stared back, unable to move. Her thoughts came in flashes. The espresso machine, the legal notice, the careful answers, the black sedan she had once thought was just another parked car. His silence in the diner office. "I am trying to protect something bigger than this. Bigger than my name. Bigger than my trust. Bigger than the truth he owed me." Ethan gripped the sides of the podium. For 1 second, it seemed as if the entire room waited with him. Victor stood nearby, smiling as though he had placed every piece exactly where it belonged. Ethan looked down at the prepared speech on the podium, then slowly moved it aside. A murmur passed through the front tables. Grace saw Daniel Price standing near the wall, briefcase in hand, eyes fixed on Ethan. She saw Victor's smile tighten. Ethan leaned toward the microphone. "Before I speak about the future of this foundation," he said, his voice steady but low, "I need to tell the truth about what has been happening under my name." The room shifted. Grace barely breathed. Victor stepped closer to the podium, still smiling, but his lips had gone thin. "Ethan," he said, quietly, though the microphone caught part of it. Ethan did not look at him. "For the past several weeks, I have been working inside one of our partner diners and visiting one of our community kitchens under another name." A ripple moved through the ballroom. Heads turned. Nora closed her eyes for half a second, as if a prayer had been answered and complicated at the same time. Grace's hands curled around the edge of her chair. Ethan's gaze came back to her, and this time there was no hiding in it. "Some people in this room know me as Ethan Whitmore," he said. "One person here knew me as Eli, and she deserved the truth long before tonight." Grace stood. She did not plan to. Her body simply refused to stay seated beneath the weight of the lie. Ethan saw her rise, and pain moved across his face. But before he could say more, Victor took the microphone beside him and laughed softly for the room. "Mr. Whitmore is being modest. He has always taken a hands-on interest in our work." Then Victor turned slightly toward Grace, his smile sharpening. "Unfortunately, not everyone close to these programs has shown the same integrity." The ballroom seemed to narrow around her. Several faces turned in Grace's direction. Ethan's expression hardened. Daniel opened the briefcase. Nora stood beside Grace, steady as stone. And Grace understood in that instant that the reveal was not the ending of the lie. It was the beginning of the fight. Victor's voice carried through the ballroom with the smoothness of expensive glass. "Some people," he said, looking toward Grace without saying her name, "mistake access for entitlement. They see generosity and decide it belongs to them." A soft murmur moved through the room. Grace felt every eye turn sharper, every chandelier brighter, every inch of the ballroom suddenly too polished, too clean, too far from the alley where this had all begun. Nora stood beside her, one hand resting lightly against Grace's elbow, not holding her back, only reminding her she was not alone. Ethan did not let Victor continue. He reached for the second microphone and spoke before the whispering could grow teeth. "Be careful, Victor." The room fell quiet. Victor gave a little laugh, the kind meant to tell rich people that everything was still under control. "Ethan, I understand this is an emotional evening, but perhaps this is not the place for confusion." Ethan turned fully toward him. Under the stage lights, he no longer looked like Eli, the quiet dishwasher with wet sleeves and careful hands. He looked like the man whose name was on the building, the checks, the invitations, the entire glittering machine. But his voice, when it came, was not arrogant. It was tired, honest. "There has been confusion," he said. "For donors, for community partners, for volunteers, for hungry families who were promised help that never reached them, and for a woman who was accused of stealing because she asked where that help went." Grace's throat tightened. Victor's smile faded at the edges. "Those are serious claims." "Yes," Ethan said. "They are." Daniel Price stepped forward from the side wall and handed a small remote to Ethan. The giant screen behind the podium, which had been displaying the foundation logo, went black. Then a spreadsheet appeared, bright and undeniable against the darkness. Delivery dates, invoice numbers, donation shipments, altered signatures. People leaned forward. Someone near the front table whispered, "What is this?" Ethan looked out over the room. "These are records from the last 18 months. Shipments marked as delivered to community kitchens that never received them. Payroll entries for workers who do not exist. Vendor invoices inflated and routed through companies connected to members of this foundation's leadership." Victor moved closer, his voice low but tight. "Turn that off." Ethan did not look at him. The screen changed again. Photographs appeared. Empty pantry shelves. Stacked boxes in storage rooms. Donation labels removed and replaced. Then came audio clips, short and clear, not dramatic, just ordinary voices saying ordinary things that made the room feel colder. A manager saying, "Hold those boxes until the cameras arrive." Another voice saying, "Tell Nora there was a shortage." A third voice, unmistakably Victor's, saying, "Poor people do not audit paperwork. Keep the donors happy." A gasp spread through the ballroom. Victor's face hardened. Those recordings are taken out of context. Nora's laugh cut through the room like a match striking. "Then give us the context." All heads turned toward her. She did not flinch. She stepped forward, silver curls bright beneath the chandelier light, red scarf folded neatly at her throat. "My kitchen served 200 people last Thursday, with supplies meant for 80 because the shipment your office reported as delivered never came. That was not a clerical error. That was a choice." Victor tried to smile again, but it no longer fit his face. "Nora, no one questions your dedication. You just question the character of the young woman who helped me keep people fed," Nora said. "So yes, Victor, I believe questions are welcome tonight." Grace felt something rise in her chest, not anger exactly, not courage exactly, but the sharp, clean breath that comes when shame finally realizes it does not belong to you. Ethan looked at her then, not asking her to save him, not asking her to forgive him, only making space. That was new. That mattered. Grace stepped into the aisle. The room blurred for a moment. Rows of donors and city officials and polished strangers turning toward the waitress Victor had tried to make small. Her hands shook, so she clasped them together. "I worked at Miller's Diner," she said, her voice quiet at first. "I saw donation boxes come in with foundation labels. I saw them disappear before Nora's kitchen ever got them. When I asked questions, I was told to mind my business. When I kept asking, I was accused of stealing." She swallowed, but her voice steadied. "I have been poor. I have been hungry. I have been behind on rent. But I have never taken food from people who needed it. Someone in that diner thought calling me poor would make people believe I was dishonest. But poverty is not a character flaw." The silence after that was different, not empty. Listening. Ethan's face changed, pain and pride crossing it at the same time. Victor opened his mouth, but Daniel was already handing documents to two officials near the front. One of them, a woman in a charcoal suit, stood and nodded to security. There was no chaos, no shouting, no spectacle, just the quiet sound of consequences arriving in polished shoes. Victor looked around the room for support and found only cameras, cold faces, and donors suddenly eager to be on the right side of truth. Ethan stepped back to the microphone. Effective immediately, Victor Hales is removed from all foundation responsibilities. The board members connected to these accounts will be suspended pending independent review. Every diverted dollar will be restored, with additional funding matched from my personal assets. And beginning tonight, the Whitmore Foundation will no longer audit itself. He looked toward Nora. An independent community board will oversee distribution, not executives, not public relations teams, the people doing the work. Nora held his gaze. "That is a beginning," she said. "Not a victory lap." Ethan nodded. "Agreed." Then he turned back to the room, and his voice lowered. "I also need to say something that is not legal, financial, or strategic. This happened under my name. That means the shame is mine before it is anyone else's. I built a company that taught people to make bad news look presentable before it reached my desk. I trusted reports more than workers. I trusted polished rooms more than back doors. And when I finally went looking for the truth, I did it by hiding who I was." His eyes found Grace again. This time the whole room followed his gaze. Grace wished they would not. She wished the most painful part of this could happen somewhere quiet. "That choice helped expose corruption," Ethan said. "But it also hurt someone who had already been hurt enough. Grace Miller gave me food when she believed I had nothing. She gave me work, trust, and the use of her father's jacket. I answered that trust with half-truths. I will not pretend justice makes that right." Grace felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she kept them there. Not because crying was weakness, but because she wanted to hear every word clearly. Victor was guided out through a side exit, his protests swallowed by the larger silence of people pretending they had never admired him. The screen went dark. The gala, with all its flowers and gold-rimmed plates and scripted generosity, had cracked open. People began speaking at once, some shocked, some defensive, some suddenly compassionate now that cameras were still rolling. Ethan stepped down from the stage and walked toward Grace slowly, stopping several feet away, leaving distance like an apology. "Grace," he said. She looked at him, and for 1 second she saw both men at once. Eli in the dish room, Ethan under the chandelier. The lie and the truth wearing the same face. "I am sorry," he said. "For Victor. For Brad. For the accusation. For all of it. You told the truth to them," she said softly. "Yes. But you lied to me." His face tightened. "Yes." That single word hurt more than any excuse would have. Because it was clean. Because he did not decorate it. Because he finally let the truth stand without asking her to make it easier for him. Around them, the ballroom continued buzzing, but Grace felt strangely calm. "I am glad you exposed him," she said. "I am glad Nora's kitchen will get what it needs. I am glad people will know I did not steal." Ethan nodded, hope and fear crossing his eyes. Grace took one small step back. "But I do not want to be your redemption story." The words landed between them, quiet and final. "You are not," he said. "Then prove that by not following me." Ethan went still. Nora came to Grace's side, but did not speak. Grace looked once more at the man she had trusted, the man she had misjudged, the man who had just shaken an entire room and still could not repair the small broken thing between them. "Whatever you build next," she said, "build it because it is right. Not because you want me to forgive you." Then she turned and walked toward the exit. No one stopped her. The marble lobby outside was almost empty, lilies glowing beneath soft lights, rain whispering against the tall glass doors. Grace stepped into the cold night, without the donated dress feeling borrowed anymore. Behind her, inside the ballroom, Ethan stood alone beneath the noise of applause that had finally come too late, holding in his pocket the folded note from her father and understanding, with painful clarity, that the most important test of his worth would happen when no one was watching. 3 months later, the old brick building on West 25th Street smelled like fresh paint, coffee, and warm bread before sunrise. The sign above the door was simple, black letters on a whiteboard, no gold trim, no donor names, no corporate slogan. No questions kitchen. Grace had chosen the name herself on a cold morning when Nora asked what she wanted people to feel when they walked in. Grace had looked around the empty room, at the scratched tile floor, the second-hand tables, the pantry shelves waiting to be filled, and said, "I want them to feel like they do not have to defend their hunger." Now the place opened at 6 every morning. Construction workers came in before shifts. Retired neighbors came for coffee and stayed to fold napkins. Families picked up grocery bags without signing humiliating forms. Volunteers learned names before needs. On the wall near the serving line, a small handwritten sign read, "Eat first. Explain later." Grace had written it herself, though she never told anyone where the sentence came from. She told herself it was just practical. She told herself lots of things in those 3 months. She told herself she did not notice that every Saturday at 7, Ethan Whitmore arrived through the side door in jeans, work boots, and a plain gray sweatshirt. She told herself she did not notice that he never brought photographers, never parked out front, never corrected people who assumed he was just another volunteer. She told herself she did not notice how he always took the hardest jobs first, unloading 50-pound bags of rice, scrubbing stock pots, mopping the hallway, breaking down cardboard in the freezing alley. The first Saturday, Nora had handed him a mop and said, "Start there." Ethan had nodded and started there. The second Saturday, a volunteer asked him if he was new in town. He said, "In a way." The third Saturday, Mrs. Alvarez from Grace's building patted his arm and told him he was too skinny to lift flour bags alone. He smiled, thanked her, and carried 2 anyway. Grace did not forgive him that day, or the next week, or the week after that. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a door that opened because someone knocked beautifully. It was a floor rebuilt board by board after trust had fallen through. Ethan seemed to understand. He did not ask to talk when she was busy. He did not send flowers. He did not offer a check with a ribbon around it. The funding for No Questions Kitchen had come through an independent community trust with Nora, Grace, and 3 neighborhood leaders controlling every dollar. Whitmore Group could not use the kitchen in advertisements. Ethan had insisted on that clause himself, then stepped back and signed wherever Grace told him to sign. The changes spread beyond the kitchen. Miller's Diner reopened under new management after the investigation. Brad was removed. Every worker received back pay for stolen tips. Nora's pantry shelves stayed full, not because of a gala speech, but because the delivery trucks finally went where the paperwork said they went. Victor Hales and his partners faced public consequences that unfolded through lawyers, auditors, and court dates Grace did not need to watch to believe. For once, the people who had made quiet suffering profitable were forced to answer in rooms where polish could not save them. Still, justice did not erase hurt. Grace knew that every time Ethan crossed the kitchen with a crate of apples and looked at her, as if waiting for permission to become human again. One snowy Saturday in late February, the pipes under the back sink froze before dawn. Grace arrived to find Nora on the phone with a plumber, 2 volunteers boiling water, and Ethan lying on his back beneath the sink with a flashlight between his teeth. His sleeves were pushed to his elbows, his hair damp, his expression focused in a way that made Grace remember the espresso machine at Miller's and the first little crack in his disguise. "You know plumbing too?" she asked. He looked out from under the sink and removed the flashlight. "I watched 3 instructional videos and made one confident mistake." Despite herself, Grace smiled. It was small, but he saw it. For 1 second, the room warmed. By noon, the water was running again. By 2, the lunch crowd thinned. Grace went to her small office in the back to update the pantry list and stopped in the doorway. Her father's denim jacket hung on the wall in a simple wooden frame. Not displayed like a trophy, protected like a promise. In the pocket was the old receipt, unfolded so the faded words could be read clearly. "A man's worth is what he does when nobody claps." Beneath it, on a smaller card in Ethan's handwriting, were 4 words. "I finally understand." Grace stood very still. Behind her, Ethan said softly, "Nora let me hang it this morning. If you want it down, I will take it down." Grace did not turn around right away. Her throat had tightened too much. "You kept it?" "Yes." "All this time?" "Yes." She touched the edge of the frame. "Why?" Ethan stepped into the doorway but stayed there, leaving space as he always did now. "Because when you gave it to me, I thought you were lending me warmth. Later, I realized you were lending me a standard." Grace let out a shaky breath. "That sounds like something approved by a lawyer." He smiled faintly. "I am trying to recover." This time, her smile lasted longer. On the desk sat a set of keys she had not noticed before, beside a folder with the name of the building next door printed across the top. Grace looked at him. Ethan raised both hands slightly, as if surrendering before she could misunderstand. "Not a gift to you. A transfer to the community trust. The building next door is paid for, taxes covered for 5 years, no Whitmore branding, no conditions except one. You decide what it becomes." Grace stared at the keys. "Ethan, it can be storage, classrooms, job training, legal aid, whatever the board chooses." His voice softened. "I did not do it so you would forgive me. I did it because it should have been done years ago." She studied his face, searching for the man who had lied, finding instead the man who had stayed when applause disappeared. "And what do you want?" she asked. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded diner napkin, worn soft at the creases. "Eat first. Explain later." Grace covered her mouth with one hand. He looked down at it, then back at her. "I let you believe I was poor because I was afraid nobody could see me without the money and still choose to stay. But the deeper truth is, I was poor. Not in my bank account. In every place that mattered." His voice broke slightly, but he did not hide from it. "You gave me food when you thought I had nothing. Then you gave me the chance to become someone who does not need to pretend. I am not asking you for an answer today. I am asking if I may keep showing up." Grace looked through the office window at the kitchen beyond them. Nora was laughing with Mrs. Alvarez. Volunteers were stacking bowls. A man at the serving line was taking extra bread for his neighbor. The room was alive with the kind of dignity no gala could manufacture. Then Grace looked at Ethan. Not Eli. Not the billionaire on the stage. Ethan, standing quietly in a community kitchen, holding a stained napkin like it was the most valuable thing he owned. She took the keys from the desk and placed them in his palm for one brief second, then folded his fingers around them with hers. "You can help us unlock it tomorrow," she said. His eyes filled with something brighter than relief. Not victory. Not possession. Gratitude. Grace released his hand, but she did not step away. Outside, snow began to fall over Cleveland, softening rooftops, sidewalks, bus stops, and the alley behind the building where hunger had once met mercy. And inside No Questions kitchen, while nobody clapped, two people who had been bruised by different worlds stood beside each other and finally understood that love was not proven by what someone had, but by what they chose to do when there was nothing left to hide.